You cannot seriously be doing this right now. This is completely unacceptable.
Ma'am, Section 4B of the bylaws is very clear. Here is the documentation.
Oh my goodness, look at that!
The first thing I saw when I pulled into Willow Creek Estates was my truck hanging halfway off the ground. A tow truck sat in my driveway, hydraulics whining, chains tightened around the tires of my black Ford F-250 like it was some abandoned junk vehicle. I slammed the brake so hard my coffee exploded across the dashboard. What the hell? The tow operator looked over calmly, like this happened every day. Maybe for him, it did, but for me, this truck wasn't just transportation. It was my business vehicle, my late father's truck, the same truck I'd rebuilt with him before cancer took him 3 years ago. And now some stranger was dragging it out of my driveway at 7:15 in the morning. I jumped out immediately. Stop. The tow driver paused the lift halfway. You the owner? Yes, I'm the owner. He pointed casually toward the sidewalk. Take it up with the HOA. Of course, the HOA. I followed his finger, and there she stood. Karen. Not literally named Karen, but spiritually, absolutely. Linda Harper, HOA Enforcement Committee Chair. Perfect blonde haircut. Red blazer. Clipboard pressed against her chest like a weapon. She smiled when she saw me. Not a friendly smile. A victory smile. Good morning, Mr. Carter, she said. I looked between her and my truck. Why is my vehicle being towed? She flipped through paperwork dramatically. Violation of community parking standards. I blinked. It's parked in my driveway. Yes, she replied calmly, as in an authorized commercial-style oversized vehicle. I actually laughed once. Not because it was funny, because it was insane. It's a pickup truck. It exceeds HOA visual compliance recommendations. That sentence alone told me everything about the kind of person she was. Visual compliance. She nodded proudly. We're protecting neighborhood property values. I stared at her for a second, then at my truck, then back at her. You had my truck towed because you don't like how it looks. It was cited 3 times. I frowned immediately. I never got citations. Another smile, this one smaller, sharper. They were mailed. I already knew that was a lie, because I checked my mail every day, especially lately. I'd only moved into the neighborhood 2 weeks ago, still unpacking, still figuring out who was who. But one thing became very clear very quickly. Linda Harper enjoyed power way too much. The tow driver cleared his throat awkwardly. Look, man, I just need authorization to stop the tow. I pointed at Linda. She authorized it. He nodded. Priority HOA enforcement. Priority. Amazing. Apparently my parked truck was an emergency now. I walked toward Linda slowly. You need to put that truck back down. Her smile disappeared slightly. Oh, what? That question hung there. Confident, smug, used to winning. And honestly, under normal circumstances, maybe she would have. But Linda Harper had made one massive mistake. She assumed I was just another homeowner. Another person she could intimidate with violation letters and towing threats. What she didn't know was that yesterday afternoon, before this whole circus started, I had signed paperwork officially appointing me as a new interim HOA president. The old president resigned suddenly after financial misconduct allegations. The board voted privately. I accepted quietly. Paperwork finalized at City Records yesterday. The official announcement wasn't scheduled until Friday. Linda clearly hadn't been informed yet, which meant the woman currently towing my truck technically worked under me. I almost told her right there. Almost. But then she crossed another line. Tow it, she told the driver coldly. The hydraulics engaged again. My father's truck lifted higher, and something inside me changed instantly. Not anger. Clarity. Because people drunk on small amounts of power always expose themselves eventually. You just have to let them keep talking long enough. I pulled out my phone, started recording. Can you state your name and HOA position for the record? I asked calmly. Linda frowned slightly. Why? Because I'm asking. She hesitated, then answered proudly. Linda Harper, Enforcement Chair for Willow Creek Estates HOA. Did you authorize towing a resident's personal vehicle from private property? Yes. Without speaking to the homeowner first. It's within HOA authority. I nodded slowly. Perfect. The tow driver suddenly looked uncomfortable. Should I keep going? Linda folded her arms. Yes. That was mistake number 2, because while she was busy trying to humiliate me publicly, she had no idea the board had spent the last month investigating abuse complaints against her specifically, unauthorized fines, selective enforcement, harassment accusations, even complaints about intimidation tactics. And now, I had video evidence of her escalating enforcement before the official leadership transition announcement. Beautiful timing. I slipped my phone back into my pocket calmly. Then I looked directly at her and said, "You might want to stop this tow immediately." She smirked. "Oh, what?" This time, I smiled back, because starting this morning, I said quietly, "I'm the new HOA president." Silence. Real silence. Even the tow truck operator froze. Linda blinked once, then laughed nervously. "No, you're not." I reached into my truck bag, pulled out the signed appointment documents, board seals, city filing confirmation, effective immediately, and handed them to her. The color drained from her face so fast it honestly looked painful, because suddenly the woman abusing HOA authority was standing in front of the one person who could officially remove it from her, and the tow truck still hanging from my driveway like evidence. Linda Harper looked like someone had unplugged her brain. 1 second she was standing there smugly authorizing my truck tow like queen of the neighborhood, and the next, she was staring at official HOA appointment papers with her mouth slightly open. "No," she said quietly, then louder. "No, this is to be fake." The tow truck driver immediately lowered the hydraulics halfway. Smart man, because suddenly the situation smelled dangerous. Not physically dangerous, politically dangerous. I stayed calm. Very calm. That made it worse for her. "You can call the board treasurer if you'd like," I said, "or the city records office." My appointment became effective yesterday at 4:42 p.m. Linda's hands tightened around the paperwork. I could actually see panic trying to fight its way through her expression, because she understood something instantly. Every decision she made this morning now looked very different, especially the tow. The driver stepped toward me carefully. "Sir, do you want the vehicle lowered completely?" "Yes," I replied. "Right now." The truck came down slowly. Chains loosened. Hydraulics hissed. And the second all 4 tires touched the driveway again, Linda snapped. "This is abuse of authority," she shouted. I almost laughed at the irony. "Interesting choice of words," I replied calmly. Her face turned red instantly. "You tricked me." "No," I said, "you acted before checking facts." That one landed hard, because it was true. Linda wasn't careful because people like her usually don't need to be. They rely on intimidation, speed, confidence. Most residents fold before questioning anything. But today, she picked the wrong driveway. Several neighbors had gathered near the sidewalk by now, watching openly, no pretending anymore. Phones out, whispers spreading fast. And in HOA neighborhoods, public embarrassment is political death. Linda noticed them too, which made her even more unstable. "You can't remove me over one misunderstanding," she snapped. "One misunderstanding." I repeated, then pulled out my phone again. "I have you on video authorizing towing from private property without homeowner contact, based on citations that were never delivered." Her eyes widened slightly, just slightly, but enough, because now she realized this wasn't a verbal dispute anymore. It was documented. The tow driver quietly started disconnecting equipment faster, clearly wanting no part of this disaster. "Sir," he muttered to me quietly, "I was told this was fully approved." "I'm sure you were." Linda turned toward him immediately. "Do not start blaming me." And there it was, the beginning of collapse. People under pressure reveal their real instincts fast. And Linda's instinct wasn't accountability. It was survival. My phone buzzed. "Board treasurer, call me ASAP." Perfect timing. I answered on speaker. "Daniel." The treasurer said immediately, What the hell is happening over there? I looked directly at Linda while answering. Your enforcement chair authorized towing my vehicle from my driveway this morning. Silence. Then, she what? Several neighbors audibly reacted at the same time, because now the board itself sounded blindsided, not supportive. Blindsided. The treasurer continued rapidly. We specifically told Linda all enforcement actions were frozen pending leadership transition. Boom. Linda's face lost even more color. What? I asked calmly, though I already knew this was getting worse for her. We sent a board-wide email last night. He said, no citations, no fines, no towing until the new administration reviewed ongoing complaints. I slowly turned toward Linda. You got that email? She didn't answer, which was answer enough. The neighbors started whispering harder now, faster, because suddenly this wasn't strict enforcement anymore. It looked personal, targeted, rogue. The treasurer's voice sharpened. Daniel, please tell me she didn't actually tow the truck. I looked at the tow operator. She started to. Oh my God. That reaction mattered, because it confirmed the board already knew Linda was becoming a liability. The call ended with one sentence. Emergency HOA meeting. 1 hour. Linda immediately stepped toward me. Voice lower now. Controlled panic. This can still be resolved privately. And there it was. The universal sentence spoken by people the moment public consequences appear. I smiled slightly. You seemed very confident 10 minutes ago. That was before you realized I had authority. She stopped talking, because that was exactly it. People like Linda don't fear hurting residents. They fear hurting the wrong resident. The neighbors began dispersing slowly, already texting everyone they knew. I could practically watch the gossip spreading in real time. HOA Karen towed new president's truck. Disaster. Scandal. Power fight. This neighborhood hadn't had entertainment this good in years. As Linda walked back toward her SUV, I said one final thing. Bring every enforcement file to the meeting. She froze slightly, then kept walking. That reaction told me something important. There was something in those files she didn't want reviewed. And suddenly, I was very interested in seeing everything she'd been hiding behind that clipboard all these years. Because this story wasn't about my truck anymore. Not really. That tow was just a mistake that exposed the person behind it. And 1 hour from now, the entire HOA board was about to find out exactly who they'd allowed to control the neighborhood. The Willow Creek Estates clubhouse had never been this full before. Not even during election season. Not even when the pool renovation money mysteriously disappeared 2 summers ago. Tonight, every chair was occupied. People stood against walls. Others crowded near windows trying to listen from outside. Because word had spread fast. Linda Harper towed the new HOA president's truck. That sentence alone was enough to pack the room. But underneath it, there was something bigger. Something residents had been waiting for a long time without realizing it. A chance to finally push back. I arrived 5 minutes early carrying a black binder filled with transition documents, board authority paperwork, resident complaints, financial summaries, and the video, especially the video. The second I walked inside, conversation stopped, not completely, just enough to shift the energy. People stared, some curious, some nervous. A few looked relieved. At the far end of the room, Linda Harper sat stiffly beside the remaining board members. No clipboard tonight. That alone felt symbolic. Board Treasurer Mark Reynolds looked exhausted already, sweating through his collar, rubbing his forehead like he regretted every decision that brought him here. Linda refused to look at me directly, which was interesting, because people like her usually survive through eye contact and confidence. But confidence disappears fast when evidence enters the room. Mark stood up first. This emergency session of Willow Creek Estates HOA is now in order. No one clapped. No fake HOA politeness tonight. We are here regarding an enforcement incident involving Ms. Linda Harper earlier this morning. A woman near the back interrupted immediately. You mean the illegal tow? Murmurs exploded across the room. Mark raised both hands. Please, one at a time. Good luck with that. Because once angry homeowners smell weakness in an HOA, years of frustration come flooding out all at once. I stayed quiet, watching, listening. Linda finally stood up, trying to regain control. This situation has been completely exaggerated, she said sharply. I was enforcing existing community guidelines. Against the HOA president, someone yelled. Laughter erupted instantly. Linda's face tightened. I was not informed of the leadership change. I finally spoke. You were informed enforcement actions were frozen pending transition. Silence. Everyone looked at her, then at Mark, then back at her. Mark cleared his throat awkwardly. That email was sent to all board members last night. Boom. Linda immediately shifted tactics. The vehicle still violated visual compliance standards. A man near the front stood up instantly. So did your son's dirt bikes parked outside for 6 months. More shouting, more voices. Suddenly everyone had stories. You fined my mother over a wheelchair ramp. You threatened me over my service van. You cited my mailbox 3 times in 1 month. Linda tried speaking over them. Failed, because something had changed in that room. Fear was gone, and once HOA fear disappears, authority usually follows. Mark slammed the table, repeatedly trying to restore order. Enough! Everyone sit down. Eventually the noise settled slightly. Not calm, just focused. Mark looked at me carefully. Daniel, do you want to present your evidence? Linda's head snapped toward him instantly. Evidence, she repeated. I stood slowly, opened the binder, connected my phone to the clubhouse projector, then played the video. The room went silent immediately. Linda's voice filled the clubhouse speakers. Tow it. Then again, it's within HOA authority. Then again, rules apply equally to everyone. Every sentence sounded worse inside a quiet room full of angry residents, especially because the footage showed exactly what everyone recognized immediately. She wasn't enforcing rules. She was enjoying power. The video ended. Silence stayed. Heavy silence. Then an older veteran near the back stood up slowly. My wife has cancer, he said quietly. She was terrified every time this woman came near our house. Nobody interrupted him. She fined us because our medical supply deliveries were visible from the street. Linda immediately shook her head. That is not what happened. Yes, it is. Another resident interrupted. You threatened my disabled daughter over her accessibility ramp, too. Now the stories came nonstop, like a dam breaking, selective enforcement, harassment, targeting elderly residents, threats over medical equipment, unauthorized fines. Mark looked completely overwhelmed, because this wasn't one complaint anymore. It was a pattern, and patterns kill organizations fast. Linda finally exploded. Oh, please. None of you cared when property values were rising. The room froze. Bad sentence. Very bad sentence. Because now she'd said the quiet part out loud. To her, residents weren't people. They were obstacles to neighborhood aesthetics. I leaned forward slightly. You towed my truck from my private driveway despite frozen enforcement orders. She glared at me. Your truck looked terrible. Gasps spread across the room. Not because of the insult, because she still didn't understand the problem. Even now, Mark slowly removed his glasses, looked exhausted, defeated. Then he said the sentence that officially ended Linda Harper's power in Willow Creek Estates. Linda Harper. Effective immediately, your enforcement authority is permanently revoked pending formal investigation. Silence. Then chaos. Residents started clapping. Actually clapping. Some cheering openly. Linda looked genuinely stunned. You can't do this, she whispered. Mark looked at her with tired honesty. No, he replied quietly. We should have done it a long time ago. That line hit the room hard, because everyone knew it was true. Linda grabbed her bag aggressively, chair scraping loudly across the floor. This neighborhood will fall apart without standards, she snapped. Nobody answered, because deep down, everyone understood something now. The neighborhood hadn't been functioning because of Linda Harper. It had been surviving despite her. And as she stormed toward the exit, something unexpected happened. Nobody followed her. Nobody defended her. Nobody stopped her. For the first time in years, Linda Harper walked through Willow Creek Estates completely alone. and the woman who loved HOA power more than anything else. The meeting should have ended the story. For most neighborhoods, it would have removed the toxic HOA official, apologize, move on. But Willow Creek Estates had a bigger problem now. Because once Linda Harper lost authority, people stopped being afraid to talk. And the stories that started coming out, they were bad, really bad. The morning after the emergency meeting, my phone wouldn't stop ringing. Emails, photos, violation notices, residents sending years of documentation they'd been too intimidated to challenge before. One woman sent me 12 separate fines over curtain color inconsistency. Another family received parking violations while their son was deployed overseas and the vehicle never moved. An elderly couple had been threatened with legal action over a wheelchair-accessible walkway. Every complaint had one thing in common: Linda Harper's signature. I sat in the HOA office clubhouse surrounded by stacks of files while Treasurer Mark Reynolds looked like a man realizing he'd helped build a bomb. "I didn't know it was this bad," he muttered. I looked up from another complaint folder. "You didn't want to know." That hit him hard because it was true. Bad systems survive when decent people convince themselves someone else is handling it. Mark rubbed his face tiredly. She always said strict enforcement protected property values. "Yeah," I replied, and everyone let that sentence excuse everything else. We opened another file, then another, then another. Patterns started appearing fast. Certain residents got cited repeatedly. Others never got cited at all. Medical exemptions were ignored. Friends of Linda received warnings instead of fines. People who challenged her suddenly received random inspections. Selective enforcement, classic abuse pattern. And the deeper we dug, the uglier it became. At noon, there was a knock on the clubhouse office door. A woman in her late 60s stepped inside slowly holding a grocery bag full of papers. "Are you the new president?" she asked carefully. "Yes'm." She hesitated, then placed the bag gently on the table. "These are all the fines Linda gave my husband before he died." The room went silent instantly. She pulled out letter after letter. Grass violations, holiday decoration violations, mailbox violations, noise complaints. Her husband had been on hospice care. One citation was issued while an ambulance sat outside their house. Mark looked physically sick reading that one. "She threatened foreclosure over unpaid fines," the woman whispered. I stared at the paperwork. "How much?" "Almost $19,000. $19,000 against a dying man." That was a moment that stopped feeling like HOA corruption. It started feeling personal, cruel, systematic. The woman looked at me quietly. "My husband used to shake every time Linda walked toward our house." Nobody spoke for several seconds after that, because there wasn't really anything to say. Eventually, she left the papers behind and walked out slowly, and Mark just sat there staring at the table. "We failed these people," he said quietly. Yes, they had. But now, the truth was finally surfacing. By late afternoon, residents filled the clubhouse lobby waiting to share stories. Not complaints anymore. Confessions. People admitted they stayed silent because they feared retaliation. Some paid fake fines just to avoid harassment. Others removed medical equipment or accessibility modifications because Linda threatened legal action repeatedly. Fear. That was the real power behind her authority. Not bylaws, not rules. Fear. Then came the discovery that changed everything. Mark unlocked an older filing cabinet in the back office, one nobody had touched in years. Inside were archive enforcement records, and hidden between them, a second set of books, private notes, unofficial tracking lists, color-coded, green residents, yellow residents, red residents. I frowned immediately. What is this? Mark started reading silently, then stopped, then read again. Oh my God! What? He turned the page toward me slowly. Next to several resident names were handwritten notes. Push harder. Potential legal intimidation works. Medical excuse likely exaggerated. Visible disability equipment lowering neighborhood image. I felt actual anger hit my chest reading that. Not frustration. Anger. Because suddenly Linda Harper wasn't just abusing HOA authority. She was targeting vulnerability deliberately, and she documented it. Mark looked horrified. She kept private targeting notes. Yeah, I said quietly. She did. Then my phone buzzed. Unknown number. I answered carefully. This is Daniel Carter. Mr. Carter, a calm voice said. This is Assistant District Attorney Rebecca Collins. That got my attention immediately. I understand your HOA may have uncovered records relevant to potential civil rights and fraud violations. I looked at the file spread across the desk, then at Mark's pale expression. Yes, I replied slowly. I think we did. A pause. Then, we'd like to review everything. Everything. Not just Linda. Not just the tow. Everything. Because now outside authorities were getting involved. And once government investigators enter HOA misconduct cases, they don't usually stop at one person, especially when documentation exists. That evening, Linda Harper finally tried to contact me directly. First voicemail since the meeting. Voice shaking slightly. "This situation is getting out of control," she said. "We need to discuss this privately before lawyers get involved." I almost laughed hearing that. Before lawyers get involved? That ship had already exploded. I deleted the voicemail without replying, because after years of controlling residents through fear, Linda Harper was finally discovering what accountability felt like. And unlike HOA fines, real consequences don't disappear when you bully people hard enough. 3 days later, Willow Creek Estates made local news. Not the small community bulletin kind either. Real news. Live trucks, cameras, reporters standing outside the HOA entrance while residents pretended not to stare. And at the center of all of it, Linda Harper. The headline spread across every local station by noon. HOA under investigation following allegations of selective enforcement and resident harassment. That was the polite version. The neighborhood version was simpler. Karen finally got caught. I stood near the clubhouse entrance watching reporters gather while Mark Reynolds nearly had a panic attack beside me. "I never thought it would become this public," he muttered. "That's usually what happens when years of abuse finally surface," I replied. The truth was, once the ADA's office requested those files, everything accelerated fast. Investigators reviewed archive complaints. Residents started formally submitting statements. Attorneys began contacting former homeowners. And suddenly Willow Creek Estates wasn't just an HOA neighborhood anymore. It was evidence. Inside the clubhouse, folding tables were covered with documents, violation records, fine histories, photographs, internal notes, including Linda's private color-coded resident system. That discovery alone had investigators furious, because now there was proof certain residents were intentionally targeted more aggressively than others, especially elderly and disabled homeowners. At 11:40 a.m., 2 investigators from the district attorney's office arrived. Professional, calm, carrying legal boxes and laptops. One introduced herself immediately. Daniel Carter. "Yes, I'm Investigator Morales. We'll be collecting all archive enforcement materials." Mark nervously pointed toward the back office. "There's a lot." Morales gave him a look that said she already knew. The second investigator quietly photographed everything before touching it. Procedure, documentation, chain of custody. Real investigations feel very different from HOA threats. They move slower, cleaner, and far more dangerously. As they worked, more residents arrived. Some just curious, others emotional. One older man walked directly toward me carrying a folder so thick it barely closed. "She fined my wife while she was on oxygen," he said immediately. I looked up sharply. "What?" She said the medical tanks were visible through our garage window. I honestly didn't know what to say anymore. Every news story somehow sounded worse than the last one. The man handed over copies of the notices. Linda kept increasing penalties every month until we paid. Investigator Morales overheard that instantly. "Do you still have the original notices?" she asked. The man nodded. "Every single one." "Good," Morales replied calmly. "We'd like copies." That moment mattered, because residents finally realized something. People in authority were actually listening now, not dismissing them, not threatening them, listening. And once victims feel heard, the floodgates open. By afternoon, reporters started approaching residents outside the gates. Questions everywhere. How long has this been happening? Did the HOA target vulnerable residents? Were board members aware? That last question terrified Mark the most, because technically, the board should have known. Maybe not every detail, but enough warning signs existed, enough complaints, enough rumors. The truth was uncomfortable. Good people stayed quiet too long because confronting Linda was exhausting, and that silence helped her continue. Around 3 p.m., my phone rang. Private number. I answered carefully. Daniel Carter. Silence for a second, then Linda's voice. You ruined my life. Not hello, not denial, straight accusation. I walked outside away from everyone before responding. No, I said calmly. You did that yourself. She laughed bitterly. You think these people care about justice? They care about headlines. That's still more accountability than residents got from you. Silence. Then her voice hardened. You have no idea what pressure this job creates. I looked toward the clubhouse windows where elderly residents were finally handing evidence to investigators. No, I replied quietly. I think I understand it perfectly now. She exhaled sharply. You think you're some hero because you caught me towing your truck. That truck exposed you. Long pause, because deep down, she knew it was true. If she hadn't targeted the wrong resident at the wrong time, none of this would have surfaced this fast. The board would have kept ignoring complaints. Residents would have stayed intimidated, and Linda would have continued operating unchecked. But arrogance makes people careless eventually, and towing the new HOA president's truck, that was catastrophic level carelessness. You could have handled this privately, she said quietly. There it was again, that word, private, because people like Linda always want privacy once consequences arrive. But the suffering she caused residents wasn't private, so neither was this. I ended the call without another word. That evening, another bombshell dropped. Investigators discovered an authorized HOA legal fees charged to targeted residents, meaning Linda may have manipulated enforcement penalties financially too. Possible fraud, possible extortion. Now even former board members started hiring attorneys, because once financial misconduct enters the picture, everyone nearby gets nervous. By sunset, Willow Creek Estates looked nothing like the pristine, perfect community Linda spent years trying to create. News vans outside, residents crying during interviews, investigators carrying evidence boxes, neighbors whispering on sidewalks. And through all of it, Dad's truck sat peacefully in my driveway, untouched. Funny how the vehicle Linda called a threat to property values became the exact thing that exposed the rot underneath the entire HOA. And the worst part for Linda, the investigation still wasn't finished. 6 weeks after my truck was nearly towed from my driveway, Willow Creek Estates held its first HOA meeting without fear in the room, and everyone felt the difference immediately. No resident sitting silently with their heads down, no nervous whispers, no panic over violation notices taped to doors the next morning, because Linda Harper was gone, officially, permanently, not suspended, not temporarily removed. Gone, and the investigation surrounding her, still growing. The final blow came after investigators uncovered unauthorized financial penalties tied directly to selective enforcement. According to the district attorney's office, several residents had been threatened with liens, legal escalation, and foreclosure notices over violations that either never existed or were never applied equally across the neighborhood. That changed everything legally. Selective harassment is ugly, but financial targeting, that opens entirely different doors, especially when documented. I stood near the front of the clubhouse before the meeting started, watching residents walk in carefully, still cautious, like they didn't fully trust the peace yet. Honestly, I understood that. Fear leaves scars long after the person causing it disappears. Dad arrived early wearing his old denim jacket and carrying coffee for both of us. The same man who once apologized for causing trouble over his truck now walked through the neighborhood with people stopping to shake his hand. Funny how quickly things change once the truth comes out. You nervous? He asked quietly. A little. He smiled slightly. Good. Means you care. That hit me harder than he probably realized, Because leadership should feel heavy. That's the difference between responsibility and control. Inside the clubhouse, every seat filled quickly again. But unlike the disaster meeting weeks earlier, this room felt calmer, lighter. Mark Reynolds stood beside me holding updated HOA reform proposals, transparent enforcement tracking, independent review boards, accessibility protection policies, resident appeal systems, basic protections that should have existed years ago. The meeting started simply. No dramatic speeches, no power plays, just honesty. We failed people, Mark admitted publicly. Silence filled the room. Not hostile silence, real silence. The kind people give when they've waited a long time to hear accountability. We ignored complaints because confrontation was uncomfortable, he continued, and that allowed abuse to grow. Several residents nodded slowly, some emotional, some angry still, most just exhausted. Then came the official announcement everyone already expected. The HOA voted unanimously to permanently dissolve Linda Harper's enforcement structure and replace it with independent oversight. No single resident would ever hold unchecked authority again. People actually applauded, not loudly, but sincerely. Then something happened I didn't expect. An elderly woman near the back stood up slowly, the same woman whose hospice care husband had been threatened with foreclosure. She looked directly at me. "Thank you for fighting back," she said quietly. The room became completely still, because the truth was, most residents hadn't needed a hero. They needed proof that standing up was possible. And once one person pushed back successfully, everyone else finally found their voice too. After the meeting ended, residents stayed behind talking for nearly 2 hours. Actually talking, not reporting each other, not gossiping, talking. Kids ran through the clubhouse parking lot laughing without parents worrying about HOA complaints. Neighbors exchanged phone numbers. People who lived side by side for years finally introduced themselves properly. The neighborhood looked more alive without fear controlling it. Around sunset, I stepped outside for air. Dad followed slowly. We stood near my truck parked peacefully beside the curb. "You know," he said quietly, "Linda probably thought towing this thing would make her look powerful." I laughed once. "Yeah." He looked at the truck for a long moment, then smiled slightly. Instead, it destroyed her entire career. Not just her career, her illusion. Because people like Linda believe authority belongs to them permanently. They mistake temporary power for personal superiority. But power without accountability eventually collapses under its own arrogance. Always. A week later, final legal updates became public. Linda Harper faced multiple civil lawsuits from former residents. Financial investigations remained ongoing. Several enforcement actions issued during her leadership were declared invalid. And perhaps the most satisfying part? Residents received refunds from improperly issued fines. Thousands of dollars returned. One man hugged me after receiving his reimbursement check. Actually hugged me. "I thought nobody would ever believe us," he whispered. That sentence stayed with me for a long time, because that's the real damage caused by abuse of authority. People stop believing fairness exists. But sometimes all it takes is one mistake, one wrong target, one person refusing to stay quiet. For Linda Harper, that mistake was towing my truck, and the moment she ordered those chains tightened around my father's old Ford, she unknowingly ended her own control over the neighborhood forever. By the end of summer, Willow Creek Estates looked completely different. Not physically, emotionally, less perfect, more human. And honestly, that made it a much better place to live. Because neighborhoods aren't supposed to run on fear. They are supposed to run on community. And finally, for the first time in years, this one actually did.